Jake Murphy floated through the docking bay of Galactic Council Station Omega-7, wondering how exactly his life had gone so spectacularly wrong that he was now humanity's official representative to a bunch of aliens who probably considered him a talking appetizer. The station was impressive, he had to admit. Massive crystalline spires twisted through artificial gravity fields, while holographic displays showed off what he assumed were either star charts or really expensive screensavers. "Ah, the human arrives," announced Ambassador Vexstar the Mighty, a 7-foot-tall purple lizard wearing enough gold jewelry to fund a small planet's defense budget. His voice carried the kind of pompous authority that suggested he'd never been punched in the face, which Jake immediately wanted to remedy. How quaint that Earth sends us such a small representative. Jake adjusted his standard-issue diplomatic blazer and gave Vexstar his most winning smile. "Yeah, well, all our big people were busy doing important things, like making sure our toilets flush properly. You know, real civilization stuff." Counselor Zix, who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a calculator, clicked disapprovingly. "The human demonstrates typical mammalian irreverence. Perhaps this explains why your species has barely achieved faster-than-light travel." "Oh, we've achieved it," Jake replied, watching General Krager lumber past. The guy was basically a walking tank with anger management issues, and what appeared to be a small weapons factory strapped to his back. "We just don't feel the need to compensate for anything by building ships the size of small moons." The three alien delegates exchanged what Jake could only describe as meaningful looks, which in his experience usually meant someone was about to suggest something incredibly stupid. He'd seen that look before, back when he was working pest control on the frontier worlds, right before some genius decided to poke the thing that was clearly labeled "Do Not Poke." "Come," Vexstar commanded, his tail swishing with what Jake assumed was supposed to be intimidating authority. "The council awaits." The council chamber was designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. Towering holographic displays showed the vast expanse of galactic civilization, while hundreds of delegate pods floated in perfect formation around a central speaking platform. Jake had to admit it was impressive, in a we have too much time and money's kind of way. "The question before us today," Vexstar's voice boomed through the chamber's acoustics, "is whether humanity deserves full membership in our galactic community, or if they should remain on probationary status until they prove their worth." Jake stepped forward, noting how the chamber's lighting made him look even smaller than usual. "Well, that's not ominous at all. What exactly do we need to prove? That we won't accidentally blow up any more of your survey ships?" The murmur that rippled through the chamber suggested that yes, that was exactly what they were worried about. "The human species," Counselor Zix intoned, "has demonstrated a concerning tendency toward violence and unpredictability. Perhaps a trial is in order." And there it was. Jake had been wondering when someone would suggest the galaxy's favorite solution to diplomatic disputes. Nothing said advanced civilizations like making your problems fight to the death for everyone's entertainment. "A trial by combat," General Krager rumbled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer having an existential crisis. "Let the human prove their species' worth in the arena of final judgment." Jake blinked slowly. "I'm sorry. Did you just suggest we settle interstellar diplomacy with a cage match? What's next? Deciding trade agreements with thumb wrestling. The arena has decided the fate of civilizations for millennia," Vexstar proclaimed, clearly enjoying himself. "It is a sacred tradition that separates the worthy from the weak. Right, because nothing says we're totally not barbarians like ritualized murder for paperwork approval." Jake looked around the chamber, noting how excited everyone seemed about the prospect of watching him get turned into human salsa. "And I suppose if I refuse?" Counselor Zix's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Then humanity remains on probationary status indefinitely, subject to committee review every solar cycle." Jake felt his soul die a little. "Committee review, with forms," Zix added helpfully. Many forms." "In triplicate," Vexstar chimed in. Fine. You know what? I'll take the murder arena over bureaucratic hell any day. At least getting eaten alive has a definite endpoint." The chamber erupted in what Jake assumed were cheers, though with some of these species it was hard to tell the difference between excitement and digestive distress. A massive holographic display materialized, showing the arena of final judgment in all its terrifying glory. It looked like someone had crossed a gladiator coliseum with a death trap factory, and then asked a sadist to do the interior decorating. "The human will face our champion," General Krager announced, and Jake noticed how even the other delegates seemed to shift uncomfortably in their seats. "The apex predator of Station Omega-7. Apex predator." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What, like a really angry space tiger or something?" The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested he'd just asked if the sun was hot while standing next to a supernova. The creature's name, Vexstar said quietly, is Gorath the Destroyer. It has never lost a battle. Its species conquered 17 star systems before we managed to capture this specimen. Specimen. Jake's voice cracked slightly. So you're telling me you've got some kind of galactic serial killer locked up as your go-to problem solver? The arena feeds it. Counselor Zix explained with what Jake was starting to recognize as alien smugness. It has not eaten in 3 rotations. It will be quite hungry. Jake looked up at the holographic arena, then back at the expectant faces of several hundred alien delegates who were clearly anticipating the kind of show that would be talked about for generations. You know what? This is still better than my last job performance review. The transport to the arena gave Jake exactly 12 minutes to contemplate his life choices, which seemed like overkill considering most of them had been objectively terrible. The viewing galleries were packed with delegates who'd apparently cleared their schedules for what they expected to be a very brief but entertaining diplomatic incident. Ladies, gentlemen and assorted carbon-based life forms, the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, presenting humanity's champion, Jake Murphy. Jake stepped onto the sandy floor of the arena and gave a half-hearted wave to the crowd. Thanks for coming out, everyone. I'd like to thank my agent, my therapist, and whoever invented alcohol for making this moment possible. The crowd's murmur died as a massive door on the opposite side of the arena began to grind open. Jake had seen a lot of scary things in his time doing pest control on frontier worlds, but the sound coming from behind that door was the kind of noise that made his evolutionary ancestors invent religion. And now, the announcer continued, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, the apex predator of 17 conquered worlds, the destroyer of fleets, the nightmare of the Outer Rim, Gorath. What emerged from the shadows was not what Jake had expected. He'd been picturing some kind of giant space tiger, maybe with extra teeth and anger issues. Instead, Gorath looked like someone had taken a grizzly bear, fed it nothing but protein shakes and rage for about 10 years, then decided it needed more claws and possibly some light armor plating. The creature stood 12 feet tall on its hind legs, with muscles that had muscles, and a set of claws that could probably open cans or disembowel starships with equal efficiency. Its fur was a deep black that seemed to absorb light, and its eyes glowed with the kind of intelligence that suggested it wasn't just going to kill Jake, it was going to do it creatively. The viewing galleries fell silent. Even the announcer seemed to have forgotten what he was supposed to say next. Gorath's massive head swiveled toward Jake, and the human diplomat felt every single one of his survival instincts scream at him to run, hide, or possibly just lie down and hope it would be quick. Instead, Jake looked up at the creature that had conquered star systems, shrugged, and said, "Well, you're definitely not what I expected. I was hoping for something more in the slightly oversized housecat category." Gorath tilted its head, as if trying to process whether this tiny human had just made a joke at its expense. The crowd held its collective breath, waiting for the inevitable mauling to begin. Jake stood his ground, mostly because his legs had forgotten how to work, and watched as the legendary destroyer began to move toward him with the kind of predatory grace that had apparently made 17 civilizations surrender rather than fight. Gorath's massive paws hit the arena sand with sounds like thunder, each step bringing 12 feet of weaponized evolution closer to Jake's increasingly fragile mortality. The creature's nostrils flared as it approached, and Jake could see its muscles coiling beneath that midnight black fur, preparing to turn him into the galaxy's shortest diplomatic career. Then something unexpected happened. Gorath stopped. The apex predator froze mid-stride, barely 10 feet away from Jake, its massive head tilting as those intelligent eyes narrowed. Its nostrils flared wider, and it began to sniff the air around Jake with the kind of focused intensity that suggested it had detected something interesting. Jake said. Because eloquence had apparently abandoned him along with his survival instincts. Is this the part where you smell fear? Because I've got plenty of that on tap right now. But Gorath wasn't moving toward him anymore. Instead, the creature began to circle Jake slowly, its enormous head lowering until it was nearly at the human's eye level. Up close, Jake could see that Gorath's eyes weren't just intelligent, they were ancient. This wasn't some mindless beast. This was a creature that had seen civilizations rise and fall, that had commanded fleets and conquered worlds through strategy as much as strength. The crowd in the viewing galleries was getting restless. This wasn't the immediate carnage they'd been promised. Vexstar's voice echoed from the speakers. What is the creature waiting for? Why hasn't it attacked? Gorath's massive nostrils flared again, and suddenly the creature's entire demeanor changed. Its ears perked forward, its tail began what Jake could only describe as a cautious wag, and it made a sound that was part growl, part purr, and entirely confusing. What the hell? Jake muttered. And that's when the memories hit him. 3 years ago, Kepler 442b, the mining colony that had been overrun by what the locals called void rats, masty little creatures the size of house cats, but with the temperament of caffeinated honey badgers and teeth that could chew through hull plating. Jake had spent 6 months on that rock, living in prefab shelters, breathing recycled air, and hunting the little demons through mining tunnels with nothing but determination and industrial-grade pest control equipment. The smell. That's what Gorath was reacting to. Even after 3 years, even after countless showers and a complete wardrobe replacement, Jake still carried the microscopic traces of void rat pheromones embedded in his skin. It was undetectable to humans, barely noticeable to most aliens, but to a creature with Gorath's enhanced senses. Gorath made that sound again, louder this time, and suddenly dropped to all fours. The massive predator approached Jake with what could only be described as excitement, its tail wagging harder as it sniffed around Jake's hands and clothes. "You've got to be kidding me," Jake said, watching in disbelief as the destroyer of 17 star systems began acting like an oversized puppy. "You smell the void rats, don't you?" At the mention of void rats, Gorath's reaction was immediate and dramatic. The creature's ears flattened against its skull, its lips pulled back in a snarl that revealed teeth the size of railroad spikes, and it let out a roar that shook dust from the arena's ceiling. But the aggression wasn't directed at Jake. Instead, Gorath began sniffing him even more intently, its massive paws gently but insistently pushing at Jake's arms and chest. "Holy crap," Jake breathed, understanding dawning. "You hate those things as much as I do." The crowd was in chaos now. Delegates were shouting questions, demanding explanations, and generally having the kind of collective meltdown that happens when your entertainment suddenly stops making sense. But Jake barely heard them. He was too busy processing the fact that Gorath, the legendary apex predator, was now gently headbutting him in what appeared to be a display of affection. "Your species," Jake said, looking up into those ancient intelligent eyes, "they're natural enemies of void rats, aren't they? And you can smell that I've killed hundreds of them." Gorath's response was to sit back on its haunches, and in a gesture that nearly gave Jake a heart attack, gently place one massive paw on his shoulder. The creature's expression had completely changed from predatory menace to something that looked almost like respect. In that moment, Jake realized that he wasn't looking at a mindless killing machine. He was looking at a fellow exterminator, a kindred spirit who understood the particular kind of hell that came with hunting creatures that reproduced faster than you could kill them and had absolutely no regard for personal safety or property damage. The silence in the arena stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Gorath remained sitting beside Jake, one massive paw still resting protectively on his shoulder, while several hundred of the galaxy's most important delegates tried to process what they were witnessing. Their ultimate weapon, their legendary apex predator, was apparently having a bonding moment with the small human they'd expected to see turned into chunky salsa. "What is happening?" Vextar's voice cracked through the arena speakers, his usual pompous authority replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like panic. "Why isn't the human dead?" Jake looked up at Gorath, who was now making a sound that could only be described as contented rumbling, like a diesel engine powered by happiness. "Well, big guy, I think we've confused them. Should we explain, or let them figure it out themselves?" Gorath's response was to lean down and with surprising gentleness for something with claws that could open starships like tin cans, nuzzle Jake's head. The gesture was unmistakably protective, the kind of behavior that said this small creature is under my protection, and anyone who threatens him will discover exactly why 17 civilizations surrendered rather than fight me. The viewing galleries erupted in chaos. Delegates were shouting in dozens of languages, demanding explanations, calling for immediate committee meetings, and generally having the kind of institutional breakdown that happens when reality refuses to follow the script. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted life forms," Jake called out, his voice carrying clearly across the arena thanks to the acoustics designed to broadcast dying screams. "I think there's been a slight misunderstanding about what humanity brings to this galactic community." He reached up and, in a gesture that made several delegates faint, and caused General Krager to make a sound like a leaking hydraulic system, scratched behind Gorath's ear. The apex predator's rumbling intensified, and its tail began wagging with enough force to create small dust storms. "You see," Jake continued, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining basic physics to particularly slow children, "Gorath here isn't just some mindless killing machine. His species, if I'm reading this situation correctly, evolved alongside something we humans have become intimately familiar with. Something that apparently makes us automatic family in his book." Counselor Zix's voice cut through the chaos, high-pitched with confusion and growing fear. "What are you talking about? Human, void rats," Jake said simply, and watched as Gorath's entire body tensed. The creature's head snapped toward the viewing galleries, lips pulling back in a snarl that revealed evolutionary perfection in dental engineering. Or as you probably call them, the swarm of endless hunger, or the plague that devours stars, or whatever dramatic name you've given to those adorable little genocidal furballs. The reaction from the galleries was immediate and telling. Delegates began backing away from the arena's edge, their various chittering, growling, and electronic communication devices creating a symphony of panic. Even Vexstar, who had been standing confidently at the front of his viewing box, was now pressed against the back wall. Gorith's people, Jake continued, enjoying the moment more than he probably should have, they're natural predators of void rats. And for the past 3 years, I've been carrying the scent of hundreds of dead void rats embedded in my skin. To him, I'm not some weak little mammal. I'm a fellow warrior who's fought the same enemy his people have been battling for millennia. Jake looked up at Gorith, who had turned his attention back to his new pack brother. Isn't that right, big guy? I bet your people have stories about the great void rat wars. I bet they have legends about heroes who dedicated their lives to hunting the little demons. Gorith's response was to lower his massive head until it was level with Jake's, and then do something that made the entire viewing gallery fall completely silent. The apex predator, the destroyer of 17 star systems, gently touched his nose to Jake's forehead in what was unmistakably a gesture of respect and acceptance. So here's the thing, Jake said, his voice now carrying clearly through the dead silence of the arena. Humanity doesn't need to prove we're worthy of joining your galactic community. We've already proven we can do something none of you have managed to do effectively. He paused, looking around at the terrified faces in the viewing galleries, then gestured to Gorith, who was now sitting protectively beside him like the galaxy's most dangerous guard dog. We hunt the things that hunt you, and apparently, that makes us family to the scariest creatures in the known universe. So maybe, just maybe, you should be asking us if you're worthy of our protection. Vexstar's strangled voice echoed across the arena. Protection. Jake grinned, and for the first time since arriving at the station, he felt like he was in control of the situation. Oh yes, because if there's one thing I learned in 3 years of void rat extermination, it's that they're everywhere, and they're getting smarter, and hungrier, and you're going to need every friend you can get. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened exactly 37 minutes after Jake's little speech in the arena, which he was pretty sure was a record for bureaucratic panic response time. The same delegates who had been eagerly anticipating his demise were now falling over themselves to offer humanity everything from full membership to their own personal communication frequencies. Jake sat in what had previously been the defendant's chair but was now being referred to as the honored guest's throne by delegates who were clearly hoping he'd forget their earlier enthusiasm for watching him get eaten. Gorith lounged beside him like a living reminder of exactly why this diplomatic situation had taken such an interesting turn. The motion passes unanimously, Councillor Zix announced, his mandibles clicking with what Jake had learned to recognize as nervous energy. Humanity is granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights, privileges, and most importantly pest control contracts. Pest control contracts. Jake raised an eyebrow, though he was already starting to see where this was going. Vexstar stepped forward, and Jake was amused to note that the ambassador who had been so eager to intimidate him earlier was now maintaining a careful distance of exactly 1 Gorith length from the negotiating table. The Council recognizes that humanity possesses unique skills in dealing with certain, invasive species that have been problematic for our member civilizations. You mean void rats, Jake said flatly. We prefer the term interdimensional vermin, General Kregor rumbled, though he too was keeping a respectful distance from both Jake and his new best friend. They have infested 47 systems in the past solar cycle alone. Our traditional containment methods have proven inadequate. Jake leaned back in his chair, idly scratching behind Gorith's ear while the apex predator made contented rumbling sounds that probably violated several noise ordinances. Traditional containment methods, let me guess, you tried bombing them. The bombing was unsuccessful, Vexstar admitted. Poisoning, also unsuccessful. Setting entire planets on fire, regrettably unsuccessful, and expensive. Jake nodded sagely. Yeah, that's about what I expected. The thing about void rats is they're not just pests, they're an evolutionary success story. They survive everything because they've adapted to everything. You can't out-tech them, you can't outgun them, and you definitely can't outbreed them. He stood up, Gorith immediately rising beside him in a fluid motion that reminded everyone present exactly why this creature had conquered 17 star systems. But you can outthink them, and you can outstubborn them, and most importantly, you can learn to think like them. And humans can do this, Councillor Zix asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Humans, Jake said with a grin that was equal parts pride and predatory satisfaction, are persistence hunters. We evolved to chase things until they died of exhaustion. We're the species that looked at mastodons and said, I bet I can make that into a sandwich if I follow it around long enough. Void rats are just another Tuesday for us. The murmur that ran through the council chamber was different now. Where before it had been dismissive, now it carried the kind of respectful attention that came from recognizing a valuable resource. The council proposes, Vexstar said carefully, a formal partnership. Humanity provides extermination services for problematic infestations, and in return receives full membership benefits, including access to our trade networks, technology exchanges, and protective treaties. Jake prompted, because he'd learned that there was always an "and" with bureaucrats. And exclusive contracts for pest control across all member systems, General Kregor added, his tone suggesting that this was a significant concession, with appropriate compensation of course. Jake looked down at Gorath, who was watching the proceedings with the kind of intelligent attention that suggested he understood exactly what was being negotiated. What do you think, big guy? Want to go into business together? Gorath's response was to stand up, walk over to where Vexstar was standing, and very deliberately sit down between the ambassador and Jake. The message was unmistakably clear. The apex predator had chosen his side, and it wasn't with the people who had tried to feed his new pack brother to him. I think, Jake said, enjoying the way Vexstar was trying not to hyperventilate in the presence of 12 feet of protective predator, we can work something out. But I have a few conditions. Of course, Vexstar squeaked. First, humanity gets full voting rights, not just membership. We're partners, not employees. Agreed. Second, Gorath here becomes the official liaison between his species and the council. I think it's time you met some of his relatives. The silence that followed that suggestion was the kind of silence that comes right before someone realizes they've made a terrible mistake. Third, Jake continued, settling back into his chair while Gorath returned to his side, we established the Human Gorath Extermination Services as an official council agency. Joint command structure, full diplomatic immunity, and really good health insurance, because this job has some serious occupational hazards. All agreed, Councillor Zix said quickly, probably before anyone could think too hard about the implications of giving diplomatic immunity to both humans and apex predators. Jake stood up and extended his hand toward Vexstar, who stared at it for a moment before cautiously reaching out to shake it. Congratulations, Ambassador. You've just made humanity the galaxy's official pest control specialists. I hope you're happy with your decision. As he walked out of the council chamber, Gorath padding silently beside him, Jake couldn't help but reflect on the universe's sense of humor. He'd come to the station expecting to be humanity's most reluctant diplomat, and instead he'd become the galaxy's first professional exterminator ambassador. You know what the funny thing is, he said to Gorath, as they headed toward the docking bay where Jake's ship was waiting. 3 years ago, I thought hunting void rats was the worst job in the universe. Turns out it was actually preparing me for the best job in the universe. Gorath made a sound that might have been laughter, or agreement, or possibly just gas. With apex predators, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. Either way, Jake thought as they boarded his ship to head back to Earth with the good news, it was going to be interesting, explaining to his superiors that humanity had just become the galaxy's most important species, because he smelled like the right kind of dead rodents. The universe, he decided, had a seriously twisted sense of humor, and he was perfectly okay with that.